Yeah, what's interesting is I actually started working for Reagan when I was 19. So by the time I was 30, I had a job where I had the protocol of a three-star general. So we'll back up a little
Wow.
before that.
What is a best practice on decision making that you could share with us?
You are making decisions in every single turnaround that's going to impact a person. Sometimes that means the elimination of their job. Sometimes it means eliminating their favorite program.
Very often there is something in an organization and it's not being on purpose, it's just hindering the process on how to continue that it really runs smoothly. Well, how do you do this?
I got up from my chair and I went downstairs to the mailroom at Intel Corporation in Munich, Germany, and I started going through the cabinets. At Intel, we used to talk about cannibalizing our own products. Cannibalize your own product. If you cannibalize your own product, you solve the problem.
To say that it is difficult and challenging at the same time, I think that those are the two terms that come together when it comes to what you're doing.
We look at change in this very surface level. Oh, it's all about AI, and it's going to change everything on this planet. Well, Elon Musk is talking about going to other planets or going to space.
When is a moment reached where something cannot be saved? Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Female Empowerment, the podcast. My name is Simone, and with me today is, well, she's in Washington, I'm in Germany, but with me today is Lisa Gable. She is or has been advisor to four U.S. presidents. She is the person who turns around an organization, a company, or a nonprofit organization when it's going south, so to speak, and she turns it around. Lisa, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
I'll start right away. It's like a jump into the cold water. When do you know that an organization was about to fail?
There are a couple of factors. One is when you're speaking to the organization and you ask them what they do. And if they can't answer you in a manner that shows that they understand what their function is, what problem they're trying to solve, why they were built in the first place, and then have metrics for how they might solve the problem, that's a huge red flag. Secondarily, you also always look at the financials and the financial history and how problematic it has been or easy it has been for that organization to raise funds.
Usually in life, a person only experiences this once to turn around something. How is it with, you do this not every day, but on a usual basis. What has it taught you?
Well, it teaches me a few things. One is that you have to go in with a very firm 90-day plan as to what it is that you are going to do. And you need the authority from the board in order to make changes over the next year and a half, because it really takes a year and a half to start to see some results from any actions that you're taking. And people get nervous, right? People get upset, people get angry, get nervous. And so the one thing that you have to have is that senior leadership, that board member support. But secondarily, you really need the support from people on the inside. And sometimes that means the elimination of their job. Sometimes it means eliminating their favorite program. And so you have to learn to put the actions that you're going to take in a form of language, in a way that you speak to people so they can understand why you're making the decision that you're making and how that decision is going to impact them. Just be very transparent and honest.
You briefly mentioned decision making. What is a best practice on decision making that you could share with us when it comes to difficult decisions? Like decisions that really impact the company in entire situations or even lives. What is the best practice you could share with us on that one?
You need to ensure that you have a very clear path forward. You need to understand what is causing the problem, where you are financially or publicly at risk, and you have to make hard decisions. But you can do so with grace and you can do so with empathy. You are making decisions in every single turnaround that's going to impact a person. You're just going to, and you have to acknowledge that. It's going to impact people. And sometimes what we see, especially with these various investment funds that come in, they don't really care about the people. They're just blowing their way right through the problem. But if you have an organization that you want to sustain itself and you want to ensure that you have public support, then it is beneficial to acknowledge what your action is doing. Yet at the same time, you have to do it. And, I spend an inordinate amount of time uh, preparing people in advance before I rip off that Band-Aid, before I take that very significant action so that they are prepared for what's coming next.
How did you come about in this career path, so to speak? It's not something it's being taught in schools like this is what we want to do. How did you come about into this direction or career?
Well, I was very fortunate. When I left the Reagan White House, I was recruited by a man, Craig Barrett. Craig ended up being the CEO and chairman of the board of Intel Corporation in the 90s. However, when Craig recruited me, he was senior vice president of manufacturing, and he had just turned around Intel Corporation manufacturing around the world. And he was himself a turnaround expert. He was an engineer. He had been at Intel for quite some time or at Stanford. But what he taught me is using process to make these decisions. And so I would be his troubleshooter. And so if he saw a problem in marketing or if he saw a problem in human resources, he would send me in to understand why that problem existed, what was going on behind the scenes, and what might be the underlying cause of the problem. I think that's one of the things that people miss is there's an underlying cause of a problem, sometimes particularly when you see a problem continuing to repeat itself, no matter how many management changes you make. That means you're not addressing the thing at the basic level that is causing this organization not to move forward. And so Craig taught me to use statistical process control, to use processes, to use quality improvement processes, all the things that he used in manufacturing as a form of decision making. And I've used that in every place that I've gone. You make it quantitative and you look at what are the end results that you need to achieve, and will the economics of that business, will that function in the way it is currently structured, allow you to achieve those objectives?
You mentioned a term or term you could say, troubleshooter. I like this because very often there is something in an organization and it's not being on purpose. It's just hindering the process on how to continue that it really runs smoothly. How do you approach, well, how do you do this?
I dig and I dig and I dig. And that's what Craig would allow me to do. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a funny example. We had an issue where there was a European office that was just being really resistant to some changes that we needed to make in preparation for the launch of the Intel Inside program, some really fundamental changes. And they were just kind of being resistant. So I flew over there. And and this was before email, right? And so we had been sending them hard copies of information, explaining why we were doing what we were doing, giving them an opportunity to provide input. They never provided input. And then they started being oppositional. And so I was sitting in this meeting in Munich, Germany, and I said, I just don't. They go, well, you never told us any of this. I'm like, yes, we did. We sent you this, we sent you that. We asked for your input. And they go, well, we never got that. And I got up from my chair and I went downstairs to the mailroom at Intel Corporation in Munich, Germany, and I started going through the cabinets. And lo and behold, all the things that we had sent them were in boxes in cabinets and had never been delivered. So they weren't being oppositional. They had literally never gotten the things that we were sending them, asking for their input. Once we figured that out, we laid everything out for them. We showed them what changes we were trying to make. We took their input on the fly, and we were able to get them on board with making the structural and operational changes in order to allow us to launch that program.
This is an area, there's so many aspects I've never actively thought about, but it is true. You need to really dig on what is functioning and what doesn't work so that it runs smoothly. What can you let us know what the hardest turnaround has ever been for you?
Well, my hardest turnaround was probably my most complex turnaround because I had a lot of barriers in place. President George W. Bush asked me to be the U.S. ambassador to the World Expo. He had made a personal commitment to Prime Minister Koizumi during a G20 meeting, and the president thought, well, how easy can this be? We'll just go ahead and participate in the World Expo, what used to be called the World's Fair. And when I got into the State Department to begin that process, the first thing that I learned is that there could be no government funds used. And how people interpreted that was very, very different. So, for example, one of the things that they told me is, well, we can't do your swearing in to become a US ambassador. And I said, well, what do I need to do to be sworn in? They said, well, you need a notary. So I call around and I discovered that Kinko's, which is now the Federal Express offices around the United States, have notaries. So I called them up and I said, do you have a notary that's there today? I need to get sworn in. And so I ran over and I actually did my swearing in, by the copying machines. But this was
Wow.
just one of many factors. They also couldn't figure out financially how I could do what I needed to do because there were so many government regulations in place. And so as a result, I had 6 months to raise $32 million, get this building built, and get the U.S. government and all of our activities. If you've been to World Expo, you know that there's various entertainers, you have economic development programs, you have a lot that's going on there. And I had to do it all within 6 months. And so that required me flying back and forth to Japan about 15 times. Luckily, I was 20 years younger than I am now. I don't think I could do it. Secondarily, it required that I put my own money into making certain things work just because we were at such a short time scale. And so it wasn't what I discovered is there were certain operational issues that had always been in place in World's Fair. There's a book called Devil in a White City. It's about the Chicago World's Fair. It's written by Eric Larson, if anyone is interested. And it talks about a serial killer. It's a true story that was at the Chicago World's Fair. But it also talks about the economics of the World's Fair and how difficult it is financially to make these large functions work. It's why Olympics are difficult for people to carry off. And so once again, I had to dig and dig and dig and understand where people had made decisions, where they had run into legal problems doing so, and where we needed to be and change how we delivered on our promises to our donors and to the President of the United States and to our host country in a manner that would not that would both bring benefits, would create jobs in America, would have a pleasant experience for those visiting the U.S. Pavilion at the Expo, but that would also ensure that none of us had an Inspector General's report and got indicted.
Wow. This is, I mean, to say that it is difficult and challenging at the same time, I think that those are the two terms that come together when it comes to what you're doing. Just listening about it is like, wow. I want to go back a bit to the young Lisa, so to speak, when you were around 30 years old. What is something that you would tell her now, like an instruction that you would give her on the career?
Yeah, what's interesting is I actually started working for Reagan when I was 19. So by the time I was 30, I had a job where I had the protocol of a 3-star general. So we'll back up a
Wow.
little before that. I think what I would tell the young Lisa is that what I learned from 19 that got me to that 30-year-old position of being elevated in such a way is learning to be very circumspect in what I said. And I think what happens, especially when situations are difficult, that people go in with what I call guns blazing, and they don't take into account, again, the feelings of the other person. They don't take into account what other people have been doing in order to try and solve a problem, in order to launch a product, to start a business. And so we can come in and be very cocky. And I learned from my dad, and this again, I was doing all this right when email was starting. So you need to know that email was a new thing. Is I learned that you write something down and you sit on it. And that's unfortunately what we have today with text messaging, is that people hit the send button way too often. And what my dad taught me, and I had some very hard experiences where I had to learn that lesson, is to keep my mouth shut, understand the other person's perspective, understand what the other person was going through, what the challenges were that they were facing before I gave a recommendation. Really study the topic. And I now do very, very deep dives before I walk into any room so that I'm more prepared before I start throwing out opinions at board meetings or in situations where I've been asked to come in and advise.
You mentioned something, and text messages, emails. We have been to a lot of changes during the last 2 decades, and also with AI coming into the game. From your experience, what would you say is the biggest change we've experienced in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 decades that really changed the game for companies and also organizations?
Immediacy of communication. It's affected military operations because there was always a chain of command. There's always been a chain of command in any business, in any military situation, in any government situation. And now someone can leap the chain of command by putting their opinion out in social media. Also, younger people can't seem to control themselves on text as much or email. And so there's this immediacy of response without doing what I'm talking about, which is pausing, sticking it in your draft folder, don't send it. The other is for an employee, you're never off. And so when I was working for a Fortune 500 company, people are sending me text and emails in the middle of the night. And initially you try to respond and then you realize, I can't survive this way. I can't be responsive to a global environment 24/7. I can't have a situation where people are able to call me at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think it's the most important thing for managers to learn is they are literally exhausting their teams when they may be constantly sending them information all the time. And so I do try to use the function on my computer or my calendar, my email box that allows me to time when information is delivered to someone. And I think that that is a requirement of managers and they don't do it very well.
No, this is absolutely true what you're saying. I feel like we've unlearned, so to speak, making lists and then put it on a meeting and not just, oh, I have an idea, then I send it, because that makes me never shut off mentally on whatever I'm working on. And then again, it's like, it's sort of a burnout because we cannot be on call for, well, 24/7. It just doesn't work that way. So in the end, we're more unproductive than productive while answering constantly or being available as well, and also demanding on the employees and so on. Could you let us into a specific turnaround, a specific story that shaped you the most? You briefly mentioned that you've also worked in boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies. Is there a story that you could tell us and let us know?
Not on the Fortune 500 end, but what I can do is tell you a story about when I advised some Fortune 500 CEOs, because it's a very public story. And that was during the 2008 when we were facing a number in the food and beverage industry. You were facing regulation and taxes around sugars. And you were also facing a call for healthier for you products. And the blame for America's obesity crisis was sitting on the shoulders of big brands. And so I was brought in by Indra Nooyi and 16 of her peers. Indra was the CEO of PepsiCo at that time, and then her peers and 16 other companies. And they wanted to make a commitment that would enable us to demonstrate that the companies were actually reformulating and changing the recipes of favorite products in a way that would make them healthier. And so that required working with the chief marketing officers and the lawyers and the CEOs of all of these companies and persuading fierce competitors to work together. We
Wow.
made a commitment as the first commitment to Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. And for people who have followed politics in the United States, you know that at the point that the First Lady decided to make this an issue, that you also had significant conversations going on around the world. You had sugar taxes showing up in a number of different countries. And so we had to make a commitment of reformulation that worked for all products. And it can be, again, emotional. And so people are looking at what ingredients can we change? And we brought everyone in, all the chief scientists into a room for 2 days. And we were getting nowhere. They were sort of on these whiteboards listing out how their products were made. And the reality is chocolate is made differently than cereal. And in fact, chocolate has an international regulatory framework for what constitutes chocolate. It comes out of Brussels. And so you can't change sugars and fats and call your product a chocolate. So that affected Nestle, it affected
Yeah.
Mars, it affected all of these. Cereal in the United States also has a regulatory function. ultimately what we ended up doing is changing the calories of products. And we decided that we needed to find a common denominator that was consistent across all products and then allow each of the companies to make the changes in the way that fit best for taste, value, and for each of the consumer, and that would enable their products to become healthier, but would also preserve their market share. We did that. What we discovered is that during that time period, we were able to reduce 6.4 trillion calories from the marketplace. And we also found that 99% of product growth over that 5 year period of time came from those healthier for you products.
This is constantly also a topic that's being discussed in the European Parliament as well regarding ingredients and also the trademark of a product and
Right.
so on. So it's a quite a fascinating topic. My husband, who's a lawyer, he constantly speaks about it. So thank you for sharing this specific story. It really is difficult to bring in different companies to discuss and work together on such an issue and letting or putting aside competitiveness for one moment, which has its place, absolutely, but to come together, to sit on a table and work on something together. Yeah. We talked a lot about fixing something. When is a moment reached where something cannot be saved, where it's best to leave it and just step away and to say, we're not going to continue to work on this because this is leading nowhere?
Right now we are facing that moment. And 20 years ago, when I was very involved with food and beverage industry, we were also facing that moment. We have created a lot of organizations. We've created a lot of complexity. Secondarily, things have changed. With AI, we're going to see massive changes and we're going to see efficiencies that are built in. And so I believe and I do know that there are a number of different activities that we need to stop doing. And those activities need to be stopped within governments. Do we need that amount of bureaucracy within the EU, within the United Nations, within the US government in order to accomplish the objective? We really don't. We have technology that would enable us to provide in a more efficient way on the policies and the benefits that we've promised to different people. Secondarily, as we have a lot of associations, we have a lot of think tanks, we have not for profits and philanthropies. Some of those philanthropies were started for very good reasons and they did very good jobs. And then what happened is that people started copying them. And when
Yeah.
people copy you, sometimes they elevate the performance level of the thing that you used to produce. And so I'm really encouraging people that who are in this situation, and I've recently had calls from 3 different CEOs of such organizations saying, "Well, what do we do?" And I looked at their financials, I looked at the number of competitors that they have, I looked at the function they're providing, and it's no longer necessary. And so what I've really encouraged people to do is do a victory lap and close down. You can celebrate the success that you had. You can celebrate the fact that you helped solve the problem. But what happens is when we solve a problem, for some reason the bureaucracy still exists. And you see that again within governments and you see it within the private sector. It's okay. It's beneficial. We see growth in business through mergers and acquisitions. That's what we see. It's a natural thing. That's what capitalism does, and it's the strength of capitalism. At Intel, we used to talk about cannibalizing our own products. Cannibalize your own product. If you cannibalize your own product, you solve the problem.
Yeah. I've never heard this term. Could you elaborate further on it? Cannibalize your own product. What does it mean specifically?
So when the Intel Inside program was initially rolled out, and I don't know if, people that you have watching this actually even remember it because it was such a dominant part of Silicon Valley and high tech when I was in the Valley. But basically, the Intel Inside program was developed so that we would give marketing dollars to our partners that would have the Intel Inside logo on their computers. That was to signal that you had the latest microprocessor. And so in order to get people to literally switch out the stamp, you had to kill off your own product. You had to at the point your product was a better product and you wanted them to change out the product, then you had to get them to
Yeah.
stop using the logo. It was as simple as that. So you incentivize them to
Yeah.
use the logo, but then you have to incentivize them to stop using it and transition to the newest product line. And that's really where, following Moore's law, we saw that the semiconductor industry was able to create such dynamic change for 25 years that we were all constantly swapping out our computers. We're not really in the
Mm.
same situation today. We have different dynamics at play. But at that point in time, as we were introducing networking, as we were introducing a wide variety of functions that required higher speeds, you needed to kill off the products that you created that had those lower speeds of performance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You're bringing some different perspectives that made me think even now while our conversation. So thank you for that. And also, yeah, so to speak, shift my mindset and also think about other points of views. One question I'd have, and I find this very interesting because we briefly spoke about it, AI, and that's it's going to change our working world, the companies, and also sectors. I think there are, well, of course, there are going to be positions, jobs that's getting killed or changed a lot. But what would you say a young woman that is looking for a career now at this specific time, what are the sectors that she could really still thrive in that are going to have a future in, well, in the upcoming decade?
I wouldn't say that. What I would say is become a generalist with deep, or at least basic knowledge of a lot of functioning categories. And my late husband was an industrial engineer, and I think that and it made him extremely effective. He ended up being one of the Apple evangelists. He helped launch the Power Mac. He then started a quantum computing company. Um, you learn a skill set, right? You learn a basic level of knowledge across a wide variety of industries. And and by doing that, you position yourself to be able to function in a wide variety of industries. You also should learn how to process, you learn how things work, learn how to rank and rate things, learn how to develop efficiencies and make decisions in a very effective manner that allows you to move forward very quickly. So it's learning the basic knowledge sets of a wide variety of things, learning processes that allow you to function in a high risk, fast moving environment, and then learning when to make key decisions to basically move in one direction versus another. If you can become this highly functional process manager, no matter what the industry is, you will have an opportunity and be successful. And you have to be creative. Don't fight it. Yes,
Yeah.
we are going through change and we're all talking about it. But what's interesting is we look at change in this very surface level. Oh, it's all about AI and it's going to change everything on this planet. Well, Elon Musk is talking about going to other planets. We're going to space. Space is
Yeah.
becoming, it's so, don't limit your thinking. We've had revolutions. We've had the Industrial Revolution. It basically stopped people from doing stuff they'd done before. My grandparents were farmers, and as my grandmother said, okay, stop farming. Move into something else if you don't have the financial bandwidth to absorb the cost of competing in the
Yeah.
new dynamic. So you have to learn to be highly functional.
I love that. Thank you for that recommendation. And I have to ask the next one. A woman who, or a person in general, who is standing in front of or has in the start of a turnaround, what is the one sentence you would say to them?
Hmm. That is a hard one, to be honest with you. I think it is to encourage them to use the data that they have in front of them to make the hard decisions. Math doesn't lie, just doesn't lie. And at the
Yeah,
bottom, at the end of the game, at the end of the process, it's all about the math.
that is true. Thank you for sharing. And another one that always comes up, especially in the context of women in leadership position, mentorship, real, not symbolic. What did it do to you, and how do you view it nowadays, looking back on your career?
I was very fortunate that I had men and women who opened doors for me along the way. I do the same thing. I have a friend. She later became Secretary of the Air Force. She's the person that launched the U.S. Space Force. She would put me onto boards when she would leave the boards, and so I have done the same thing. When I leave boards, when I leave jobs, I always recommend somebody to follow me and I place someone that I know, another woman, onto those boards. And that's really you have to help people bridge where they are today and where they need to go, and you actually have to functionally make sure that you put them in place and walk away that knowing that somebody else is now going to have that moment in time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. One last thing before we go continue into the fast question and answer section where we want to get to know you personally a bit better is, of course, a lot of our listeners and audios, just as a side fact, they are women and also men in higher positions, also high aspiring people who really want to go into the leadership section. And the last question that I'd like you to finish, no, not the question, the last sentence that I'd like you to finish is the person who is listening to this podcast and who feels really stuck in her career, could be professional, could also be personal, should really, what is the next step that she should or he should do if they feel stuck?
Depending on what time you are in your career, at some point you have to ask, what makes me happy? Where do I function the best? What are the activities that I love to do and that motivate me and that create that spark? And if you have the financial flexibility to make a change, it's okay to do so. If you're in a situation, which I was in, which is that my husband died a year ago today after being ill for 26 years, we made a lot of decisions to come in and out of the workforce without losing momentum of where it was that we wanted to go because we stepped away, and that's okay to do too. So I think being stuck has a number of different dynamics. You're stuck because you're unhappy. You're stuck because you can't get ahead in that particular organization. Sometimes you have to take a step back in order to move two steps forward, or you have to take a step to the side in order to move forward. So don't be so fixated on that next step. Instead, look at your long-term plan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this. I feel we often only focus on getting ahead, but not the small but important steps that need to be taken in order not only to function, but to really have so that it runs, that it works, and also in a sustainable way. So thank you so much you have changed my view on so many aspects I never even thought about because I haven't worked in that aspect. So thank you for sharing this. I believe we need to talk more about turning something around, but also knowing when to step back. And also, as you mentioned, be happy. It is a key factor when it comes to thriving and also in that order for success. So thank you so much. And I'm even more excited to jump into the next section, which is the fast Q&A, as I briefly mentioned, where we want to get to know you personally a bit better. First one is, what does every failing organization have in common?
Hubris.
Sorry, what?
Hubris.
What does that mean? Sorry if I'm asking.
What hubris means is that somebody puts their own self-interest above the interest of the organization. It's Icarus flying too close to the sun, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Every single organization that I have come into that had problems, the majority of them had a leader who put their own self-interest in front of the interest of the organization.
Wow, that's a good one. Thank you. A book every person who wants or is about to step into an executive role should read.
I'm going to give you two. Andy Grove's Manage What Matters, which was by John Doerr, who had also worked at Intel Corporation. Andy Grove, before that, had done high output management. It's very hard to find, but well worth downloading on your Kindle if you have one. Read that, and then read Manage What Matters by John Doerr. They are basically the same book, but written in different formats.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to link them below. And what is the most underrated virtue in business?
Diligence.
Ambition, is it something you're born with or that you can learn?
Ambition is something that you're born with, but at the same time, circumstances create a moment where someone has to take a leadership position. And we've seen that in the worst of circumstances, whether it's in war or whether was at 9/11 when you watch the actions taken by these individuals on these airplanes. The question is ambition for your own self aggrandizement or ambition because you have an opportunity to change the lives of others.
Thank you for sharing that. What is the most underrated skill in business?
Consistency. People want consistency. That's what they want. They're so tired of everything moving around. They just want somebody who they can rely on and that they know how
Yeah.
that person's going to respond to them.
It is exhausting to constantly have to adapt. That's true. Okay, what is the single most important skill a leader needs nowadays?
Humility.
That's a good one. I like it. A compliment powerful women almost never get.
When they're told that they're a strong person, the question is, how is that interpreted? So I think it's interpreted differently for men versus women.
You mean for women it's rather seen negative in a negative
It can be.
context?
You're a strong personality. You're a strong person. And it can be
Oh,
seen as opposed to you're a strong person and we trust the fact that you can move this boulder out of the way.
okay. One word for American leadership today.
Strength.
Strategy or execution, which is more important?
If you can't execute, you won't have a strategy.
Last but not least, what's one thing consultants get wrong every single time about turnarounds?
They come up with very convoluted, expensive ideas that are not operational on the ground. And I have turned around many things that McKinsey and BCG came in with because when you have people that have not actually had to go to a location and do the literal change that is being requested, it can sound really good on paper, but it does not include all the variables that you have to contend with.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your insights into your career. I feel we need them nowadays, which is, of course, also why I have you on this podcast. We need strong leaders. We need women to be prepared for leadership roles, and we need, in general, it's an uncertain world that we're experiencing at the moment, but also exciting, as we were talking about, right? It's a chance as well. It's not just change, but also opportunities that are around the corner, right? So thank you on this note for sharing about your career, your insights, and for us to getting to know you.
Well, thanks for having me again. I really appreciate being asked.